So my sister called me and told me that the police were at my door, and I couldn't think of why the police were at my door. I asked her to tell me what was going on, and she mentioned that my husband was involved in a fatal accident.
Grief, they say, is the price we pay for love. But how do we grieve? Words and languages shy away from these conversations, and perhaps the most profound thought on how is the only cure for grief is to grieve.
Yeah, I got this call at work, and I was wondering why my sister was calling. And she mentioned that my husband was involved in a fatal accident. At that point, I screamed at the top of my voice and dropped my phone. And all I can remember saying is, my husband, my husband. How we met was my auntie and I went out to eat, and I think she had been eyeing him for a long time. He worked at that restaurant, and she was like, I think, you two would make a good couple. So she gave him my number and then we connected after. We started with, my auntie's so annoying. I could see, not annoying, but how my auntie was embarrassing, for setting us up. And I remember going on our first date to the cinema. I was like, oh, this is nice. And then thinking through the movie, we watched a scary movie because I liked scary movies at that point. So when you go and watch a scary movie, you're supposed to put your arm around, the person. And he wasn't. He was into the movie. And I was like, I'm never going to see this guy again. So after I'd already made up my mind, yeah, this is not for me. And fortunately enough, he offered to escort me home. So we were students then, so we took the bus home. And at that point, we started to talk about our lives and our life stories and, what had happened, and just have really deep conversation. And then I think at that moment, our hearts connected. And I think if it wasn't for that bus journey, maybe I never would have seen him again. Yeah, he was the life of the party. He was a fun people person, socialite. Everyone knows him wherever he goes. Really kind, funny, courteous, lovely. And, we were good friends. We got married quite young and we had our children. And yeah, we had lots of beautiful memories together. I remember him being a sneakerhead. I used to threaten him with, I'm going to sell all of your trainers and we're going to get a fortune. And he'd be like, no, don't do that. So, we had a lot of fun moments. The reality dawned when I arrived at the hospital. I was expected to be able to go to a room, but I had to wait for a while, and an old couple next to me were discussing. They said something along the lines of, did you see that guy that was involved in a car accident today on the bridge? And in that moment, I just busted out crying. And in the next moment, I was taken through to go and see my husband. And, I really thought that I would be going to the hospital rooms that of, that you see in the movies, when they're wired up to a machine and, life support. But instead I was taken around the back of the hospital on the ground floor to a bereavement suite and sat on a couch and told, that my husband was in the next room. And yeah, it was strange. It wasn't what I expected. When I opened the door and I saw him, yeah, it was surreal. And, when I just touched him and I realized that, oh gosh, he's cold, freezing cold. It just hit me that, wow, he's actually dead. Yeah, I think those were the initial hard hitting moments. It was quite difficult transitioning from being married for 10 years to and co-parenting and everything into becoming a single parent and going through all the challenges of life. And I remember waking up in the mornings and I would look at myself in the mirror and I looked the same, and I'd almost forget what has happened to me for a split moment, and then it felt like a ton of bricks when it all came back and realized, oh my gosh, what's happened to me? What have I gone through? What am I recovering from? And I just felt like I can't do this anymore. Actually, part of my outward reflection, I want to look at myself and know that something has changed. I want to look at myself and remember that there is a difference. And, you know, for the previous 10 years to the time, I'd had quite long hair and I just shaved it. So I started with a bit at the back, and then at some point I was like, no, it has to all go. And I shaved all of my hair off. And I remember looking in the mirror for the first time, and it was scary but exciting. But for me, I guess it was a representation of the internal grief on the outside, because I wanted to look at myself and think, no, I'm different, something has changed. And then as my hair grew back, it was a representation of how, you know, you begin to rebuild your life again after something traumatic. And, you know, when I shaved my hair, I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And at some point, you know, my hair grew to another level and thought, wow, you know, I can't believe my hair's grown this much in this time. And I guess that's how I feel with my grief journey. Initially, it just felt like my world ended. I felt like there was no more life for me, and that was it. And as the days and the weeks and the months and the years went by, life began to come back, but in a different way. So my hair looks different now that it's grown than it did 5 years ago. And when I look at myself in the mirror, I remember that actually I've changed. I'm not that same woman that I was, and my hair looks different. And it's good. I like having that reminder. I hated forgetting and, you know, just, feeling like nothing has happened. So, that's how my hair journey kind of coincided with my grief story.
In the wake of this sad event, Abi Shotade curated and developed many helpful resources and decided to share her healing toolkit with the public. She launched, in every season, a one-stop resource center to help anyone, at the precipice of their hurt, navigate grief and morph into their best possible self, and also develop appropriate versions of loss that can be stitched into everyday conversations at different stages within our communities. She produced a brilliant series of fit-for-purpose podcasts and published creative works, including a storybook for children called My Sisters Are Not Good at Wrestling.
Following, you know, my husband passing away, when life kind of goes back to normal, you go back to work and looking after the children, and everybody goes home after the funeral. Life was like tasteless for me. Nothing tasted good. Nothing felt good. I started listening to a podcast with stories, and it was really comforting to me. And I had been in contact with people who had shared their story with me on a one-to-one basis, and I just thought, oh, imagine if other people heard these stories. It would do so much for their lives, like it was doing for me. So I just thought, actually, I could start a podcast that shares the stories of people within my community who've overcome challenges, whether it be grief, losing a spouse, losing a family member, losing a child, and it just resonate with other people, because I was hearing these stories one-on-one, and I just thought, other people really need to hear this. For the most part, I underestimated the emotions that I conveyed, especially with the book. But it's when I've gotten feedback. So I remember sending the book to a friend of ours who is in his 70s. And he didn't respond for a number of days, and his response was that he couldn't find the words, that, you know, he read the book and it was beautiful, and that he cried because it reminded him of, you know, his relationship with his father, who had also died when he was 5. And he wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words to say, but managed to, maybe 2 or 3 days later, to just muster up some words to say thank you for sharing your story, and, you know, for thank you. You know, it resonated with him so much. And also with the podcast, you know, getting feedback from people, whether it be someone who is, you know, 25 years old, who has said, you know, thank you for sharing your podcast. I really feel heard and seen in the stories that were shared. To somebody who is 65, mother of my friend, saying that, you know, she really enjoyed listening to the podcast and it really blessed her when she recently lost her husband. So for me, it was like, wow, so the content that I've created and shared can help this wide range of people. It was humbling for me, and I thought, oh wow, this is actually making a difference. Also just, you know, to have my book be used with families from charities, and, you know, how the children really love it. So I remember for World Book Day, I think it was last year, a young child dressed up as me actually and took my book to school because it really resonated. The story, she loves the book because she lost her dad before she was even born. Her mum was pregnant with her, but, you know, her dressing up as me as an author for World Book Day and taking the book into her school was such an emotional experience for me. Resources. So that's definitely been a challenge for the most part, especially with the podcast. They've been, you know, my personal resources and time. And with the book, I kind of raised a bit of money, and that went in relation to creating the book and selling it back. So I self-published, and just I was lucky to find an illustrator that was able to do it for me, who is a friend of mine, which was great. Internally, it was like, oh, this is hard. I really don't want to be vulnerable with the world. I remember sharing my story on my podcast and just, you know, feeling quite vulnerable and tired for a week or so after. So the internal part is like, this stuff really hurts, and I'm sharing it, and the world is listening and saying, great job. But actually, you know, you feel good about what you've created, but it still hurts. So it's kind of a bittersweet balance. I'm definitely still navigating, but I think the desire to help people and the desire to bring that awareness about in the community helps. I think being a peer support group worker means that I come in contact with people, and people from our community especially, and help them navigate through their grief journey and help them build the vocabulary to be able to talk about this and to be able to acknowledge how they feel. Is just to be able to create a wealth of resources, so books and resources that can be used in schools, in hospitals, in any educational facilities, for charities, for children, and for families to be able to talk around. I'd love for there to be, you know, courses, you know, that people can go on. It would be great to global and even national for in every season to be known as that, you know, those go-to books and resources for families to be able to sit down, you know, together and have these hard conversations.
What started as a traumatic experience has become a lighthouse and fortress for others grieving and resident in the UK and globally. These are not winged fairies with wands. These are your everyday people in ordinary shoes, pushing past their pain to build a more resilient and thriving community for all.